This now brings us to part 5 of the history of God. When we left off, the church had begun its new campaign of striking even deeper fear into the minds of the people, opening the doors to ideas like possession and whatnot. And once again, we enter into a new age. And this continued until the church began to dominate everything. At one point, nothing was outside of the realm of the church. And thus we enter the time of Dark Ages. This time in history was called the Dark Ages because the people had no light in their lives, both in the sense of learning philosophy and belief, and because people died by the millions, many because of the church. As such, this darkness plays a huge part in our adventure. By the time the Dark Ages rolled around, the church was in total domination of the civilized world. Whatever the church wanted, the church got. The mere suggestion that someone was thinking of going against the wishes of the church was enough to condemn them to death. Sadly, this was the first and hopefully only time in human history when God was turned against the people. One of the most known things about this era was the Inquisition. This was a time when the church commissioned truly bloodthirsty, evil men to find and root out evil. Over the course of many days, the inquisitors would torture people in ways beyond human comprehension. This would continue until either they confessed to be working for Satan or anything against the church, or they died. If they died, then it was assumed that they were innocent and now in God's loving embrace. As a quick side note, the methodical methods that the Inquisitors used to root out and destroy evil was actually the foundation for the scientific method. Because the way they did their work was so systematic, precise, and in-depth, it served as an excellent basis for the process of investigation developed later on in science. Sadly, both the church and the evil people used the Inquisition as a way to remove obstacles, enemies, and anything they didn't like from the world. The mere mention that anyone was working against the good workings of the church was enough to subject them to the ruthless Inquisitors' methods. During this time, it was also believed that all sickness, malady, or problem in life was the direct result of demons, evil spirits, or other dark forces at work. And as a means to allow the evil to escape, the priests would make incisions into those who were suffering and drain their blood, a process called bloodletting. More often than not, the process would speed the sick and injured to their deaths. However, the church believed that they were in the loving arms of God, so it was okay that they killed them. After all, if they had not performed the bloodletting, then they would have been in Satan's clutches, or at least so the church proclaimed. In this way alone, the church condemned countless people to their deaths, and sadly, that was just the tip of the iceberg. During the same period, the bubonic plague struck. It was called the Black Death and was one of the worst disasters in all of human history. In fact, it nearly wiped out of all of Europe before it was done. It was believed that anyone who got the disease was evil, and it was seen as a punishment from God. Because good people were immune to the disease, they would place red marks on the doors of houses where the sickness was to indicate that evil was present and to be aware. To help eliminate the evil, the people would burn down the houses of evil, often with the sick and their families inside. It was also the belief at the time that the disease was of Satan's doing, and since black cats were seen as Satan's minions, the people also began to kill all the cats they could find as well. Sadly, it was the rats that were actually spreading the disease. As soon as the cats were killed off, they were no longer eating the rats, and the disease spread even further. And sadly, anyone who offered any opinion that the disease was anything other than demonic possession were killed off, labeled as evil themselves. By the time the disease had run its course, about 85% of all Europe was decimated. It spared no one, not man, woman, child, righteous or evil. As soon as it began killing off the clergy, they separated themselves from the people, not letting the people know that they too got sick. For, after all, they were good incarnate, right? In the end, the plague wiped out vast numbers of the clergy too. However, that part of history is often forgotten. Remember, it was seen as a mark of evil, and only evil people got the disease. And if that was true, how come it killed the clergy just as ruthlessly as it killed everyone else? Even more sad, there were people at the time who realized that the Black Death was not a curse, but caused by tiny things you couldn't see. However, they said and did nothing, because if they did, they too would have been killed by the church. Sadly, too, anyone who got the disease and survived was also typically killed. The assumption was that if these people survived, it was because they sold their soul to Satan. There was no possibility at this time in history that their survival could have been the will of God. Everything was about evil, darkness, and corruption, which is truly why it's called the Dark Ages. Of course, this was also the beginning of the end for the church. Once all of this was over and the people realized the church actually prevented people from getting the help they needed, which was available, they began to lose faith in the power of the church. This is where we'll end off for now, and we'll continue again in part 6. Again, see you there.